Crack open a history book about video games and it won't take long to stumble across the name Nintendo. Once a humble Hanafuna card maker, the Japanese company entertained a plethora of industries following the end of the Second World War before transitioning from taxis and hotels to toys and games, priming them for the merger of technology and play that became video games. But first and foremost, Nintendo is a business, and balancing the books means finding an opportunity to grow sales while keeping costs low in both parts and manufacturing. This strategy is often credited to Game Boy and WonderSwan creator Gunpei Yokoi, targeting withering technology that a manufacturer would be keen to part with, sacrificing the newest and flashiest tech in an effort to maintain low costs for both the company and the consumer. Which is why we turn to you, dear viewers, and ask the age-old question which resurfaces every several years or so. How much will Nintendo's new console cost? Or in a more practical question, how much are you willing to pay for the successor to the ever-popular Nintendo Switch? And you answered. Boy, did you answer. So let's dig right in. First off, we have two comments which caught our attention given the currency. Cageman says, quote, depending on the quality of the hardware, price should be between 300 and 400 euro. Should be reasonable, end quote. While Darkbite ups that amount to say, quote, I say 500 euros, but a lot depends on how strong the Switch 2 will be, end quote. We're going to talk a lot about historic prices and inflation throughout this video, but for the sake of clarity, we will do so in the standard of the United States dollar. If it's good enough for the globe, it's good enough for Game Rant. But Cageman and Darkbite opened up Pandora's box with these comments, because the more I researched how much even the most recent Nintendo consoles cost in euros, I found a complex web of nations and regions which ebbed and flowed the standard price. It's official. The European Union is a little bit complex, so 400 euro or 500 euro, depending on where they are, they both may get their wish. Then gives us a bit of a history lesson stateside with this, quote, since the Nintendo Switch debuted in 2017 at $300 I think it's fair to buy the Nintendo Switch 2 at $350 minimum or $400 maximum. I can't imagine it'd go over $500 depending on how much of a revamp / facelift it gets, end quote. Din argues with the evidence, and that's the best kind of argument. However, there is another school of thought, not necessarily one that I personally entertain, but if the Switch 2 will be replacing the original Switch, and Nintendo has been making bank off that console for several years now, it's not unreasonable to think the price will be comparable to the original Switch. In fact, the only reason Nintendo or most console manufacturers move to a new platform is because the components the previous generation was built on become increasingly expensive as their practical applications end when the greater technology industry moves on. So how much is Nintendo charging for that 2017 Switch? You already know it's $300, which means no price cut. None over the past 7 long years. Could a new Nintendo Switch slot right at that $300 price range? I personally wouldn't be surprised to see a big improvement over the old Switch, but ultimately, some rather modest and affordable tech, so it certainly could be below $400. Reaper Ezekiel argues in a different direction. Quote, it's an academic point, much respect to Nintendo, but the Switch 2 will be impossible to get a hold of for at least a year. Nintendo has a status quo of overselling their consoles after all. That said, $400 sounds like a fair price, end quote. Ezekiel is touching on a point that became popular during the first Wii console. Here he calls it overselling, but I'm more familiar with the term artificial demand. The idea that Nintendo is withholding product to create a sensation, elevating the desire for the product. I myself once thought this was true, but the more I've done my research, nope, Nintendo are just a bunch of conservative cheapskates who care about their image. The last thing they want is to manufacture a bunch of product for no one to buy and for it to sit on a shelf for everyone to see. And then there's the hassles of returns, which I could talk about Nintendo's return policy history alone for an hour. But the point is, Nintendo makes what it can sell, even at the cost of more immediate sales. Sadly, Ezekiel, I agree about not being able to find a hot new Nintendo console. We've been down this road before. Happy Rodent also makes an argument for that price, but with a caveat. Quote, $400 if it comes with a new Mario game, end quote. There you're being optimistic, Happy Rodent, and I love it, but I don't buy it, as the age of the full-fledged pack-in game, let alone a Mario game, has probably come and gone. 2017, the Nintendo Switch launches. No pack-in game, price $300. 2012, Wii U launches, no pack-in game for $300, but the premium console, which saw a rotating selection of games including New Super Mario Bros. U and Nintendo Land, was available for $350. 2006, the Nintendo Wii launches for $250, and the company, still bashful from the sales failure of the GameCube, included Wii Sports to justify the console's $50 jump. And that choice is far more divisive in the business world than you would expect. Did Nintendo sell a console off the back of one pack-in game? Or had it simply handed away the sales of one of the most popular games of all time? Because in territories where Wii Sports wasn't packed in, the game still sold remarkably well. And I'll just break the bad news, Happy Rodent. In a world where you can buy a Zelda-themed console and it doesn't come with a Zelda game, I wouldn't bet on a full pack-in game. Citizen chimes in with the greater console world. As long as it's not as weak as the current Switch, I wouldn't mind paying PS5 price, even though I only need the Switch for less than a handful of exclusives, RPG Switch-only games. Good answer, and at ease, Citizen. It's certainly not going to be as weak as the current Switch. It's too expensive to keep it simple. But my favorite part of your answer is the term PS5 price, which is currently $500 for the revised Slim model. The PlayStation 5 has been a surging success since it launched in 2020, despite raising its price in several territories. But let's be realistic, even if developers are able to discover new methods of compression to deliver comparative results, it's very unlikely Nintendo's new console will ever remotely approach the basic PlayStation 5 console. And from a value proposition, it shouldn't. Unlike the PlayStation 5, this is a hybrid console that includes the ability to function independently as a handheld, complete with its very own screen. If the leaks are to be believed, that is. Sadly for cheapskates like myself, if Sony can get away with it, why can't Nintendo? Keith chimes in with his 2 cents, quote, "It would really depend on the specs and the amount of upgrades," end quote. A practical estimation, but one that pulls in two directions. The former is the PlayStation 5 setting the standard for console prices in this current age. But Nintendo has a history of being a little different in terms of pricing, even all the way back to the Famicom in 1983. Why? Well, according to several sources, it was an edict from Nintendo President Yamauchi that it should be feasible for a child to save their allowance and purchase Nintendo hardware in a reasonable time. And by several bazillion accounts, Yamauchi was not a particularly sentimental individual, but an iconoclast who would come to embody the shrewd businessman of his day. Yet he was adamant that affordability was key at the cost of cutting-edge technology, and each time he broke from that tradition, the Super Nintendo, the Nintendo 64, or the GameCube, the company saw a smaller and smaller share in the market. So Keith is right, but will Nintendo chase the market or the consumer? Dominic lets the cat out of the bag, quote, "I'm hoping to pay for a $400 price tag. I'm willing to pay more, but don't tell the big N," end quote. And it's true, Dominic. Ultimately, what is the price of a console when you spend hundreds if not thousands upon thousands of hours enjoying video games? And before anyone disagrees, how much would you pay to play Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom all over again for the very first time? Now compare that against the Switch's $300 price tag, and it feels like a bargain. 50 Shades sees the cat out of the bag and points out the elephant in the room, if that metaphor plays. Quote, "Not $700, end quote. Of course, this is a reference to Sony's recent announcement of the PlayStation 5 Pro, and its enthusiasm stunting $700 price tag. The internet was quick to call foul despite some tech enthusiasts declaring the price reasonable from both a historic and economic perspective. Historic and economic, you know what that means. We're gonna go through every single piece of original Nintendo home console hardware, but only the generational leaps. Sorry, Game Boy Advance SP stands, we'll save that for a different topic. And you're darn right we're sticking to United States prices, although the idea of using historic conversion rates and inflation rates sounds fun to a data sicko like myself, we'll have to save that for another video. Let's start with the Nintendo Entertainment System, which saw several renditions at launch due to the 1983 Nintendo video game crash, and thus the launch took place over years. Much like today, you could buy an elaborate launch bundle or simply buy a unit with a gamepad for $89, or get a Nintendo Entertainment System with a pad and Super Mario Bros. For $99.99. Let's go with that Super Mario Bros. Bundle, and guess what? We get a very familiar price, $276.72. Hard to believe, but for an extra $24, you could get a Switch. But it's true. Now, we're definitely going to stick to home consoles, but one crucial example we need to bring up while discussing the weathering technology method is the original Game Boy, which launched in 1989 for $89.99. That's $228.26 in 2024. And it's to be believed the majority of Nintendo's early hardware, while being impressive for its ingenuity, were made of very modest components and sold for a profit. Most console makers would attempt attempt to recoup costs on the games, but Nintendo had often resorted to the strategy of making money on the hardware, and Game Boy is perhaps the best example in the entire video game industry. Heck, they were still selling the thing 10 years later. But now, let's stick to home consoles. In 1991, Nintendo was back with the Super Nintendo, and this time they wanted a whopping $199.99, and that's $461.75 in 2024. No wonder all those parents were saying no, but then again, they never played F-Zero, so who's the real fool, Daddy? It's 1996, which means we're gaming in the Clinton years, with the Nintendo 64 and its $199.99 price tag. A pretty standard console price at $400.94 in 2024 money. But that's before you saw those $80 cartridges. That's $160.36 in 2024 money, which made smaller games like Turok the Dinosaur Hunter rather bittersweet. Whoever says games used to be cheaper, they lied. It's 2001 and Sega's out of the console market, but look out, here comes Microsoft, and Nintendo answers with the $199.99 GameCube. A thrifty price at that time. Would you pay $355.16 in 2024 money for the console that plays Super Smash Bros. Melee? Your answer to this question says everything about your personality. 5 years later, it's 2006 and the Wii is here with a $249.99 price tag, and with a pack-in game called Wii Sports. We're still seeing plenty of inflation, but $389.94 for a revolutionary new piece of technology, I don't know, still seems like a steal to me. 2012 brought the Wii U, perhaps the most regrettable piece of hardware Nintendo ever produced. We're gonna stick to the modest 8GB unit for $299.99. That's $410.86 in 2024 money. Much like the GameCube forced Nintendo to value creativity over horsepower, the Wii U is ultimately what cannibalized Nintendo's long history of handhelds. As it was such a significant failure, it forced Nintendo to abandon any successor to the 3DS, instead creating the hybrid Switch console. The reasons are many, but to the general player, the idea of paying for a contemporary console while getting significantly compromised ports or little third-party support made Nintendo's first HD console a painful memory. And make no mistake, it's still fresh on Nintendo's minds. Most companies could not survive the sales failure that was the Wii U, but it's also why that collector's market could skyrocket in the future. There's a heads up for you. And lastly, we have the Nintendo Switch in 2017, which was priced for $299.99. Adjusted for inflation, and we're going to see the pattern here, that's $384.84 in 2024 money. We're talking one of the biggest successes in console history, blowing past records previously thought unbreakable. The Wii U and the Switch couldn't be more different in terms of sales, and yet we can see Nintendo remain steadfast in its strategy over the course of nearly 3 decades. Neither saw a price cut. And when we look at all of these consoles, they're all launching around $400 in 2024 money. And it seems like everyone agrees. Dalroy says, $400 is fine for me. Joshy Boo's 42 seems to be looking into inflation as well. Quote, the first Switch was around $300 when it released, so I'm going to guess the Switch 2 will be a little bit more than that. Maybe somewhere around $350 to $400. End quote. Alec is open to all of the above. Quote, $300 to $400 good. End quote. And this means, in a rare conclusion, we actually have a fairly definitive answer for Gamers Said. We asked, how much would Nintendo's new console be? How much would you pay for it? And I think it's safe to call it, you said it, $400. But now the conversation will turn to you, dear viewer. Wishful thinking, or has the scientific research made a certainty? Let us know in the thread below, and we'll be sure to read your answers. As always, I want to thank everyone who participated in this week's Gamers Said conversation, and we hope to see you again next week. So keep clicking around here on Game Rant, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.